Hey, Monday afternoon, October the 7th, 2024. This video will be a recap of Roger Hornsby's spectacular career. What a great ball player, really. If you really dive in to his box scores, his accomplishments, his career, he's one of the greatest hitters of all time. Let me just recap briefly his career, okay? Started 1915, 19 years old, St. Louis Cardinals. He played for 23 years until 1937. His first year batted 246 because he just played 18 games. Okay. By age 20, he got his first 300 batting season. And he batted over 300 15 times out of 23 years. But how about this? He batted over 400 3 times. And he had a stretch of his career where he averaged 400 for about 500 or 5.5 years straight. His batting average was 400. I'll repeat it, 5.5 years. It was from 1920 through 1925. 6 seasons, 1920, 21, 22, 23, 24, and then 25. So 6 seasons. He averaged 400. Had 3 400 batting seasons. His high was 424 in 1924. He had a 403 in 1925. So he goes back to back 400. His first 400 was in 1921. But amazingly, now his third 400 season was his first 400 batting season was 1922. He batted 401. But what's interesting is before that, 1921, he batted 397. But did you know that the next to the last day of the season, he was batting 400 that year? But the last game, he went 0 for 4. So he went from 400 to 397. How about that? He could have had 400 batting seasons. Remarkable. So like I said, his stretch of 5.5 years, 6 years roughly. Listen to this. He batted 370, 397, 401, 384, 424, and 403. Averaging 400. Incredible. He had 7 200 hit seasons. Pretty good. 6 seasons, 100 runs scored. 5 seasons of over 100 RBIs. He had 6 seasons of 300 or more total bases. He had 2 seasons of 400 total bases. In fact, in 1922, he had 450 total bases. That's number 2 all time. Number 1 is Babe Ruth, who had 457, which is the record for total bases in one season. He had 18 2-homer games, and he had 1 3-homer game. Let me also point out some things you may not know. He had 879 multi-hit games, indicating 2 or more hits. Where does that rank? I think that's in the top 5 all time. Ty Cobb had 1,261 multi-hit games. Tris Speaker had 1,057. Stan Musial had 1,055. Roger Hornsby had 879. I don't know who else is in that top 5 or 6. Maybe Pete Rose is up there. I haven't looked at all his box scores. He's got a 24-year career, and he's got 3,562 games. Maybe one day I'll be able to get through all his box scores. But with Roger Hornsby, I saw every one of them, or I looked at every one of them. I looked at every one of Ty Cobb. I looked at every one of Tris Speaker and Stan Musial, and that's how I came up with the numbers. So 879 for Roger Hornsby as far as multi-hit games. He had a 33-game hitting streak. That was his high. You know, that's better than Stan Musial and Tris Speaker. They both had 30-game hitting streaks. Ty Cobb had a 40-game hitting streak. Of course, number one is Joe DiMaggio's 56. Pete Rose had 44. So did Willie Keeler. 2-hit games. Roger Hornsby had 584 of them. Where does that rank? Well, that's more than Lou Gehrig. Lou Gehrig had 555. Babe Ruth had 600 of them, 2-hit games. So he fell short on the Babe, Roger Hornsby. Stan Musial had 739 2-hit games. Tris Speaker had 754. But of course, number one is Ty Cobb, 838. I don't know how many Pete Rose had. I'll find out one day how many 2-hit games he had. 3-hit games. Hornsby had 245. That's more than Lou Gehrig, who had 201. More than Babe Ruth, who had 196. Stan Musial had 253. Tris Speaker had 257 of them. Of course, number one, Ty Cobb, 327. 3-hit games. 4-hit games. Roger Hornsby had 48 of them. That's more than Tris Speaker, who had 44. But did you know that? And it's more than Babe Ruth, who had 23 4-hit games. But did you know that Lou Gehrig had more 4-hit games than Roger Hornsby? He had 53 of them. Stan Musial had 59. Of course, Ty Cobb, he had 82 4-hit games. 5-hit games. Hornsby only had 2. Lou Gehrig never had one. Never had a 5-hit game. Babe Ruth had 6 of them. 6 5-hit games. Stan Musial, 7. Tris Speaker, 7. Ty Cobb had 13 5-hit games. 2 runs scored in the game. Roger Hornsby, 289 games, 2 runs scored. Of course, that's less than Stan Musial, who had 334. Tris Speaker had 342. Lou Gehrig had 363, 2 runs scored in the game, 363 times. Ty Cobb had 378 games, 2 runs scored. But you know who's number one? Babe Ruth had 416 games, 2 runs scored. 3 runs scored in the game. Hornsby had 52. Some of these other players had much higher ones. Tris Speaker had 64. Stan Musial had 75. Lou Gehrig had 91 games of 3 runs scored. Ty Cobb had 97. But you know who's number one? 3 runs scored in the game? Babe Ruth, 104. 104 games. 4 runs scored in a game. Roger Hornsby, 8. 8 games. That's more than Tris Speaker, who had 7. More than Stan Musial, who had 6. Babe Ruth had 11 games, 4 runs scored. Ty Cobb had 13 games, 4 runs scored. But you know who's number one? 4 runs scored in a game. Lou Gehrig, 15 games. 5 runs scored in a game. Hornsby did it once. Speaker did it once. Musial did it once. Babe Ruth did it once. Ty Cobb did it twice. 2 games, 5 runs scored in the game. You know he's number 1? Lou Gehrig, 3 games, 5 runs scored in a game. All right, 2 runs batted in a game. How many games? Just 2 runs batted in. Hornsby, 230 games. But that's less than Tris Speaker's 265. Babe Ruth had 287 of them. Lou Gehrig had 304. Stan Musial, 319 games. But you know who's number 1 as far as 2 runs batted in a game? Just 2 for the game. Ty Cobb, 324 games. 3 runs batted in a game. 107 for Hornsby. That's more than Tris Speaker, who had 71. More than Ty Cobb, who had 98. But not enough to catch Lou Gehrig, who had 118 games, 3 runs batted in a game. Stan Musial had 125 games, 3 runs batted in. We know number 1? Babe Ruth, 185 games, 3 RBIs. 4 runs batted in a game. Hornsby 8 times. That's less, though, than these other guys. Just Speaker, 20 games. Ty Cobb, 34 games. Stan Musial, 38 games. Lou Gehrig, 59 games. But you know who's number 1 there? Babe Ruth, 70 games, 4 RBIs. 5 runs batted in a game. Hornsby, 9 times. Not bad. That's more than Tris Speaker's 3, more than Stan Musial, who had 7. Cobb had 12 games, 5 RBIs. Babe Ruth had 17 of them. You know who's number 1? 5 runs batted in a game. Lou Gehrig, 57. 6 runs batted in a game. 1 time for Hornsby, 1 time for Musial, 2 times for Cobb, 5 times for Lou Gehrig, but Babe Ruth had 7 games, 6 RBIs. 7 runs batted in a game. 1 time for Hornsby, 1 time for Speaker, 1 time for Musial, 4 times for Babe Ruth. How about Lou Gehrig? 6 games, 7 RBIs. And of course, 8 RBIs in a game. Hornsby did it once. Speaker didn't do it. Musial didn't do it. Cobb didn't do it. 8 RBIs. Babe Ruth didn't have 8 RBIs in a game. His high was 7. How about Lou Gehrig? 3 games, 8 RBIs. All right, 400 batting seasons. Of course, we know that Gehrig, Ruth, Musial, and Speaker did not have 400 batting seasons. Hornsby had 3, so did Cobb, 3. Hornsby could have had 4. He was batting 400 on the next to the last game of the season. And he goes 0 for 4. He should have sat out. So he plays the last game, goes 0 for 4, and goes down to 397 for the year. Man, that would have been 4 batting seasons of 400. 300 batting seasons. Hornsby had 15. Gehrig had 12. Ruth had 17. Musial and Speaker had 18 seasons, 300 or better. Cobb, 23 seasons, 300 or better. 200 hit seasons. I mentioned that already. Hornsby had 7. Speaker 4, Musial 6, Ruth 3, Gehrig 8, Cobb 9 200 hit seasons. 100 runs scored seasons. I mentioned that already. Hornsby had 6. Speaker 7. Musial 11. Cobb 11. Ruth 12. How about Lou Gehrig? 13 seasons, 100 runs scored. 100 RBI seasons. 6 for Hornsby, 2 for Speaker, 7 for Cobb, 10 for Musial, 13 for Ruth and Gehrig, 13 100 RBI seasons. 300 total base seasons. Hornsby 6, Speaker 3, Cobb 4, Gehrig 8, Ruth 9. How about Stan Musial? 12 seasons, 300 total bases. And the 400 total base seasons, Speaker didn't have any. Hornsby had 2. Cobb didn't have 1. Musial had 1. Ruth had 2 400 total bases seasons. How about Lou Gehrig's 5 seasons, 400 total bases? All right, this is a recap of Stan the Man Musial. No. All right, I'm talking about Roger Hornsby. Recap Rogers Hornsby. 2,200. Let's see, how many games did he play? You got to count the playoffs. Hornsby, he played 2,260. 2,260 games in his career. Had 8,173 at bats. So he didn't get to the 10,000 at bat mark. He had 1,579 runs scored. You know, Lou Gehrig had, how many did Lou Gehrig have? As far as runs scored, 1,888. So Lou Gehrig played just about the same number of games as Roger Hornsby, yet he beats him up by about 200 in runs scored. How about that? All right, we know he had 2,930 base hits, 541 doubles, 169 triples, 301 homers, 1,584 RBIs, 135 stolen bases, had 1,038 walks. You know, Babe Ruth had over 2,000 walks. Who was more feared? 679 strikeouts. That's very good. In 8,173 at-bats. Very good ratio. 358 career batting average. 434 on base. 577 slugging. That's good. And 4,712 total bases. How about Rogers Hornsby's career? Second greatest hitter of all time, behind Ty Cobb. What do you think of Rogers Hornsby? All right, I'm done with the recap. The next player I'm going to get into, Ted Williams. Stay tuned. I'm out.